Billy Blue, my knight in shining brindle. Welcome to another episode of A Poet Reads to Write. This is going to be a bit of a difficult video for me to make. My last video, which has now had more than 200 views, but unfortunately in going out to a much wider audience, I've unfortunately reached a large audience also who has taken a lot of offense at my video, my story of conversion. And so I have a video that has attracted more dislikes than likes, and I have a video where some people have tracked down my email address via my YouTube channel and have emailed me some very hurtful, very almost hateful comments. And I guess I thought that this, when it eventually happened, if it happened to me, I guess I thought it wouldn't really worry me. I just live in this tiny home with my Billy. I live a very sheltered, quiet life. I really thought such things wouldn't really touch me that much. But I have been really hurt and upset by this. The video conversion was a very emotional video, and I also accept and I apologize if I've caused any offense. I too often speak in a way which comes across as being very vehement, as being, I am someone who's made up their mind and they're looking for disciples, or they're not taking any prisoners. It's all or nothing, and I don't mean to come across that way, but I know I do, and I apologize for that. I really meant in that video to be simply, with some humility, thinking out loud, thinking philosophically, theologically out loud, trying to make sense of this place, this emotional, psychic place where I have found myself. And maybe I didn't do that very well. So this is my attempt to maybe with a little more moderation explain some things, and hopefully also have the opportunity to apologize if I have caused offense, because I certainly didn't mean to. As I said in that video on conversion, I grew up in a home that was a very naive, idealistic, Protestant Christian home. The Christian faith was the bedrock of our whole existence. It really was. And it was a bedrock experience that I was very happy in and felt very rooted in, founded in for a very long time. But yes, God created my brain in a certain way, and as a teenager, young adult, I did start to read things and ask questions and challenge things, and I was just trying to make sense of my lived experience. But it did unsettle and it did upset some people. And I know that's partly my fault. I say things out loud too vehemently, I get too passionate, and people, it's very easy to take me the wrong way. Constantly saying I didn't intend it that way isn't good enough. I know I need to do better. I need to not only be more humble, but speak with more humility and with a gentle, quieter place as well. I know that. So I'm really sorry if I have caused offense. But for me, one of the, I am not, I've talked about the way God has created my brain, and, I do ask lots of questions and challenge things. But the other way my brain works, anyone who knows me, I don't think many people who know me would accuse me of being rational. I am an emotional, intuitive thinker, and I know I'm very gifted in some areas. God has blessed me with a lot. I know that. I'm not trying to be falsely humble either. But I'm not a rational person. I am an emotional, intuitive thinker. And that has, as with everything, it has strengths and weaknesses, doesn't it? So, why am I in this position from an emotional point of view? Well, I need to take you back. When I was in my very early 30s, there was a day, I was the eldest of 6, and I lived in a very large extended family. You know, mum was one of 5 kids, dad was one of 5 kids, so there were lots of cousins. You know, it was a huge extended family. And I remember thinking as a teenager and as a young adult, I couldn't believe God's grace for us. You know, I got to my young adult years before I had ever experienced the death of anybody close to me. You know, other than older people, you know, grandparents, great-grandparents who, you know, you expect, you know, even though it's still tragic and you still feel their loss, you know, terribly. But they are deaths that you, in a sense, anticipated. You know, it is the sort of natural way of things. But I got to my early adult years and I had never experienced the death of anybody close to me. And I remember thinking how gracious God had been to us. And, you know, this was all, despite my questioning and my challenging certain tenets of that foundation of faith, this was something, again, that just was so reassuring, and it confirmed that bedrock in my life of this faith position. But there came a time in my early 30s when I went for a bushwalk one day on a December 28, just after Christmas, and it was a time when, you know, all of the big family had got together. So, you know, my brother, my younger brother, because I was the eldest of 6, so one of my younger brothers, and 2 of my brothers-in-law, the 4 of us went out for a walk. And it was just planned to be a simple day walk in the lower Blue Mountains in an area known as the Blue Labyrinth. It's a beautiful, incredibly majestic part of the world. If you Google the Blue Mountains, you will see this incredibly dry, sclerophyll forest with incredible, you know, very dramatic sandstone escarpments. It's an amazing place to walk, a place that I've always been very, very attracted to, very drawn to. You know, it is the part of the world where I do feel at my most spiritual, at one with God as a creator. But on this December 28, we went for a walk. I think I can talk about this because I've dealt with this now with my psychologist and had lots of ways of managing the PTSD. So I think I can get through this. We went for a walk and we were following a creek line, just enjoying yabbies and frog spawn and, you know, the noise of the cicadas, because in Australia, December 28, of course, is the height of summer. So it was the height of summer heat. And, you know, we were getting tired. We had walked a long way and we were tracking this creek line, gently going down, you know, hill the whole way. And eventually, as always would happen, inevitably, you know, the creek line went flowing over a huge waterfall, and there was a large cliff line in our path obstructing our movement down this creek line. So we had to make a decision about whether to try and find a way around this cliff line to get down to it so that we could continue our way, or whether we would in fact have to retrace our steps all the way back to the beginning and go back around the long way. So we sat down and we thought, you know, we would sit down and worry about it after we'd had a bit of a rest and had something to eat and drink. Unfortunately, my younger brother decided to recce the way ahead. And within a couple of minutes, I didn't see anything. But within a couple of minutes, there was this shocking noise as the thump of his smashed up body hit the rocks down below. And my 2 brothers-in-law and me, of course, immediately went into shock, and we scattered and knew, because he was in a pool of water at the bottom and we could see that. So we had to find a quick way down to get him out of the water and to see what would happen. And when the three of us did eventually get our way down and we worked out what was happening, of course the decision was made. It was a fairly natural decision. I would stay with Matthew, who at this stage was still alive, making this terrible stomach churning groan. But he was unconscious, fortunately. And my two brothers-in-law went to get help, which we knew would be a helicopter rescue. So I was left with my brother, and he was a terrible mess. And as I gathered him into my lap, you know, the blood, the snot, the brain fluid pooled into me. And I think fortunately he remained unconscious the whole time. But it was at least 2 or 3 hours that I was with him while he was making this stomach churning groan. Fortunately unconscious, but there was this constant groan coming from him. And I just gathered him into my lap and did what I thought I could. And after 2 or 3 hours, he died. And I remember standing and I just looked up, and I was in a place of the most incredible natural beauty. Just this, you know, the turpentine trees, the coachwood, the wattles, the eucalypt forest, the cicadas booming with their crying. I was just in this place of the most majestic turpentine majesty. And then I looked back down at my brother's smashed up body, and you know, there was no light, there were no prayers, there was no redeeming anything. All I could hear was the roar of the cicadas and an empty blue sky above. And I was absolutely devastated. I don't know what I expected. But there was just nothing. It was absolutely devastating to me that nothing happened, that there was no opening of the pearly gates. You know, there was nothing to reassure, to confirm, to give me some type of solace in this situation of utter despair. And I was just left with his body, waiting for the helicopter rescue and retrieval. And eventually that came and took us out. It was just a devastating moment for me, and you can imagine the devastating impact it had on my faith. You know, I went from being, I guess, someone who had once been an evangelical, naive, idealistic Protestant Christian with a literal belief in the Bible, Noah's Ark, creation, the whole thing. You know, I had believed in the whole package. My family had gone through a variety of Baptist and Pentecostal churches, so I had been in and out of this my whole life. And even as a young adult, as I started to move a little bit towards more liberal Christianity, you know, of discovering, you know, the adventure of Darwin and evolution and the Big Bang and all of this sort of thing, and maybe reading the Bible a little differently to how I had read it as a child. You know, I still believed at that stage that the Bible was true, but the way you experienced that truth had to be read differently, I thought. So I had moved towards a more liberal type of Christianity, even though I was still very much a Christian, and my Christian faith was still the bedrock of my experience. And then 10 weeks later, you're not going to believe this. 10 weeks later to the day, after my brother died, we had been to his funeral, we'd done all that. We thought we'd put all that to bed. 10 weeks later to the day, my mum and dad's house burnt down with rats gnawing through wiring. And my youngest brother, the youngest in the family who had Down syndrome, he didn't escape the fire. My father got burned and with smoke inhalation and difficulties trying to rescue Danny, and he was taken to hospital. All of us kids, of course, at that stage left home. We were all adults and had gone our own way, so it was only Mum, Dad and Danny who were at home. And Danny didn't get out. And I remember coming back, and we went to the hospital, and we were brought into a room where Danny was hooked up to a life support machine, and we were left with him. And it was Mum, me, and my sister, Melissa, the eldest of my sisters. The three of us were there with Danny hooked up to life support. He also never regained consciousness. He was on life support that whole night. And in the morning, I remember the doctors coming into the room, and they sat down with us. And they basically gave us one decision. The only way forward was to cut life support and to allow Danny a natural death, pain-free on his drugs, but to disconnect the life support and let nature take its place. The damage was far too severe. His lungs, for example, because of the inhalation of the smoke and all the heat, his lungs were never going to be able to do their job ever again. And he was very badly burned. So we had to make that decision to cut his life support and let him die. And then we did it all again. We had, within 10 weeks, we went to our second funeral. And I remember at Danny's funeral, I made a decision. I made a decision at Danny's funeral that I would really go hullabaloo. I was going to scream myself silly. I was going to cause a huge havoc and a fuss. I bottled everything up, kept everything in for Matthew. I think I even read a poem at Matthew's funeral. I can't remember, but I think I did. And when it came time to Danny's funeral, I was done. I was just going to let everything out and not hold any pain back in. And of course, all of that was actually just done self-pitying for an audience of me alone. No one else knew exactly what I was feeling. I didn't do any of that out loud. I just bottled everything up all over again. And after Danny's funeral, my partner at the time, it is true, she begged me to go to a grief counsellor. And I do have in my defence, back then, this is 30 years ago. It's about 30 years ago when this happened. And, it was a different time in my defence. We didn't have back then mental health care plans. Mental health and all these sorts of things was not in the public currency the way it is today. We live in a world now, don't we, where professional footballers can take time off in season, being paid $1 million a season to play football, and they can take games off for mental health as though they've got a physical injury. When I was a young man, when all of this happened, that would have been inconceivable. But it is true, my partner asked me to go to a grief counsellor, and I went 2 or 3 times, but they wanted you to relive the moment. They wanted you to retell the 2 moments of death, and as you retold the stories, you relived the whole thing, and you put yourself back in those moments. And for me, it was too much. It was too much reliving those moments. I can see now that I guess that that would have been for my mental health most healthy thing for me to do. If I had have done that in a controlled environment, you know, in the company of psychiatrists and psychologists, it probably would have saved me a lot of grief down the road. Because what did happen, of course, is that I just bottled everything up, buried it in overwork. You know, I just became, for the next 30 years, a chronic overworker. And it was easy for me to become an overworker because I was working with adolescents who were identified as at risk, you know, of dropping out of school, of whatever. So I was running big sport and camp programs for teenagers at risk and other teenagers as well in different schools and Duke of Edinburgh programs, all sorts of things. So it was very easy to overwork because you were working with teenagers who had a lot of needs. But it didn't help me in the long run, of course. And everything, you know, I had become a self-harmer probably for the last 20 years. My partner, I think, would say I was actually a self-harmer. And then in late 2014, I had a really big breakdown and a really major suicide attempt. And I ended up in a psychiatric hospital and then transferred to a psychiatric hospital where I spent a couple of weeks. And that was the end of my normal working career. So now I simply live from home in my tiny home, and I live with my rescue greyhound, Billy Blue, who is the light of my life. You know, he has literally saved my life. I haven't had any suicide attempts since that dog came into my life. But this incident, you know, it's had a devastating, as you would hope, you would expect, this has had a devastating impact on my faith life. I went from being an idealistic, naive, young Christian man to being someone who almost had no faith, who could see very little reason to in fact go on. You know, there didn't seem to be any room for an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving God. And I have spent the last 20, 30 years since the passing of my two brothers thrashing about, I suppose, trying to work things out and to come to some type of alignment, some type of peace for where I am up to in this life. And, you know, I think really now all I really deeply understand in my conscience is brokenness and loss. So yes, you know, in my last video I was thinking philosophically, theologically out loud about maybe where my conversion experience is up to. And it is very fraught. But these are, you know, some of the reasons why my experience is a very fraught one. I guess I'm at a position now where, you know, physicists believe in this finely tuned universe, don't they? That, you know, you've only got to change the laws of physics in the most minute way, and life in this universe, life on Earth, would be completely inconceivable, impossible. And it is so, you know, life is so unlikely according to the laws of physics that now physicists have had to create this multiverse to somehow account for why we have life in Earth. That if there is an infinity, an infinite number of universes, and every universe is slightly different from the other, it's not surprising, they argue, that we have life in at least one of them. And to be honest, I just find this argument, it's an exciting idea, you know, the boldness of it, the visionary nature of it. It's an incredible idea, but I find it implausible. For me, it seems far more plausible, the whole idea of fine-tuning, to be honest. It seems far more plausible. Instead of coming up with these bold, far-fetched ideas of a multiverse, it almost, to me, seems more plausible that the finely tuned universe is evidence of some type of creative power. Particularly, even more so for me, because I love history and anthropology and all of these sort of things. Particularly for me, when you look at the history of life on Earth, and when you look going right back to Neanderthal times, every group of people has an intuitive and emotional awareness of some type of creative force. And this whole idea of God or of the gods who have created everything, it's in every human experience. It's part of the bedrock of what makes us human, I think. Going right back to the Stone Ages, we were making stone pillared enclosures and, standing stones and all sorts of things to worship the gods for millennia before anybody thought of building cities and homes to live in for humans. All of this stonework, all of these big grand adventures in building and construction, they were all about expressing wonder at the universe and love for a creator type God. They weren't about human life, human security at all. And for me now, of course, because I do have such a broken, fraught headspace, for me, another thing for God and love is simply when I encounter Billy Blue, this greyhound. He's just come into my life. And yes, I know you could argue that he simply wants to live a life free of pain, and he's simply looking for me because I feed him and because I protect him and give him a life full of comfort, free of pain. But I don't think that's good enough. The relationship I have with Billy, I just experience love from that dog every single day, for every moment of every day. And the love that I feel with this dog, just like the finely tuned universe, and just like looking at the long history of human endeavour, as I said, going right back to Neanderthals, with all the things they were doing with eagle feathers and rock art, and every human expression, movement has reached up for something else. And that's what I want to do as well. That's what my last video was meant to express. A type of wonder, a type of delight, a longing for God again. And I do have a longing for God again, to somehow find my way back. I do want a conversion experience. And yes, I don't want a conversion experience back to the faith of my childhood. I never want to be a simple, naive, idealistic Protestant child. I'm never going to believe in the Bible as the literal Word of God. Sorry, that's not true. I do believe that the Bible is the Word of God, but I believe it has to be read in a certain way. It is not history, it is not science. So I believe the Bible is the Word of God, but I think it needs to be read much more carefully and sensitively than the literalists would have us believe. That's just what I think. I could be wrong, but that's what I think at the moment. I think for me, if I do find my way back to God, to some type of endeavour with Christianity, the Christian faith, for me it's going to be a fairly naturalistic religion. I intuitively, emotionally anymore, I think I have a bit of a problem with anything too supernatural. I think I will always have a problem with accepting, and I hope I'm wrong with this, and I probably am wrong. So I'll say that before I even say this. But I think I will always have a problem believing in miracles. I suspect that I don't believe in anything that is supernatural. For me, this wonderful creator God is not all powerful. It's the only way to make sense of suffering for me. I do believe that God is all loving, maybe even all knowing. But I cannot reconcile an all-powerful God with my lived experience. I could be wrong. I hope I am wrong. But that's where I am at the moment. But yes, for me, I experience God now every day. Every time I cuddle Billy Blue, my greyhound. Billy spends every moment of every day looking for me, looking out for me. He's never more than 2 meters away from me. And I just feel so loved, and I feel so safe when I'm with him. As I said, I have not had a suicide attempt since that dog came into my life. And he's been living with me now for almost 5 years. I'm really pleased to say the last 4 or 5 years, I've hardly even had any moments of self-harming. And that was, I was in a terrible, almost monthly cycle with that. It was the only way of staying alive. I sort of substituted the death wish with this self-harming, and as long as I could see blood, something about that freed me up so that I knew I wouldn't do what I actually wanted to do. This is all very difficult, but since that love has come into my life, I have changed. He has saved me. I am saved by a dog. And I don't think it's blasphemous to say that, because in being saved by my Billy Blue, I do understand that I am being saved by God. God comes to us in many different ways, unforeseen ways, I really believe. And I do now live a life where I feel safe. I feel protected by love. And yes, for me, in the most immediate sense, that love comes in the shape of a greyhound. But I know that there is something else going on there. And I want, Billy is conscious, I am conscious. I don't know what consciousness means post-death, but it really warms my heart to think that in the afterlife, whatever that means for our consciousness, our shared consciousness, I will be part of Billy and Billy will be part of me for eternity. I really strongly feel that dog is part of me in a really spiritually strong way. And it really makes my heart go soft for God and to be longing for something and to be returning to something. So, my last video, I didn't mean to cause offense. I know I speak too vehemently about things at times. I need to have more humility. I need to speak from a place that is quieter and more gentle. And I hope, I promise I am open to learning about that. And that's one of the things I think, if I could return to God, return to some type of faith life, I think it would be so good for me. And one of the things that a life of prayer, a life of mysticism, I think would open me up to would be to being more gentle and a little more quiet. And Billy also appreciates that. My Billy, he's such a gentle, quiet, timid dog. He gets really upset if I get passionate and loud or, argumentative. If I lose my temper a little bit, if I get a little bit short-tempered, he gets very upset with me very quickly. He is a really gentle, timid, quiet dog, and he needs me to be gentle and quiet. So he's been really good for me in that regard as well. He's really led me along a path that is towards gentleness and quietness. That dog has been so good for me. And I really believe that the love that I have with Billy is partly wrapped up in this whole experience of God. And there is something there, I think. So I am open to faith. I am open to a life that revolves around these things again. And, I do want to be in some type of orbit around this center that we can call God. I want to return to something. And, I have a feeling for me that either all religion is true or none are true. For me, if I do come back to faith, it will be the Christian faith, because that's where I find the best nurture, the sense of community. It's what would allow me to be welcomed back with open arms with my family, for example. And I want that spiritual connection with my grandparents, particularly with my pa, who was such a wonderful Christian man, a Jewish Christian man. But yes, I do have this feeling. I think, while the relationship with God for me would be in that Christian form, because that's where I get the most sense of community and love and nurture from, I really do believe, I think, I could be wrong, but I really do think that either all religion is true or none are true. What all religions do is encourage the human spirit to reach out to God, to have this relationship with God as a creator, the finely tuned universe in which we really can feel quite at home. I have a really strong sense for this, I think. And I think it's exciting. You know, I don't think it's problematic to say that all religions are true or none are true. For me, that is reassuring. It's inclusive. It's welcoming. You know, it really does again underline, it really does again underline this whole idea that God is love. You know, God, I don't think is all powerful. It doesn't make sense of all the suffering in the world for God to be anything else. So no, I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think I accept an all-powerful God. But I do like to think that I can recover for my prayer life, my meditation life. I would love to recover an idea, a relationship with an all-knowing and particularly an all-loving God. And I am really open to that. So maybe I have slightly better explained things and been able to explain things in a slightly more moderate tone. This is my conversion story, or part of it, and I hope this is, if you like, a loving defense of maybe where part of my previous video went wrong. Thank you for listening to me. I'll give you another update in a month or two maybe, and as I do more reading, particularly with Philip Goff, and we can see where things go. Philip Goff is this amazing young philosopher who's just returned to his own Christian faith as a fairly progressive, liberal Christian, but he's a really interesting bloke that has really challenged me, and again, like my Billy Blue, has really made my heart again soft for a return to something more certain. So thank you for listening to me. Thank you, and bye for now. I'm going to give Billy a very big cuddle. Thank you. Bye.